This morning, as Sarah and Lewis had just said, we are continuing our sermon series looking at the life of Abraham. I've put this table right in the way of me. It feels like you're on the other side of the table to me. Let me move that around. There we go. We are continuing our sermon series looking at the life of Abraham. We've been looking at it for the last 2 weeks, and this is our third week. And this morning, I want to talk a little bit about what it means to walk in faith in the face of fear. Now, one thing I've realized is as I get older, I've started to realize I'm getting more and more fears of certain things. I'll give you a story to kind of explain. This time last year, me and my family, I've got 3 little ones, but at the time we only had 2. One was only born 6 months ago. But about this time last year, me and my wife Susie, we went to a place called Center Parcs. Now, yeah, I know, if you've been to the subtropical paradise of Center Parcs, you know what it's like. Anyway, we spent most of our time there, unfortunately, in the kind of toddler pool because our kids are very small, and so we're about warm from the knee down and very cold upwards. And so whilst we were in the pool, there are like 2 slides. So there's this baby slide, which is like quite gradual, slow pace. Kids are fine with that, and they kind of master it. But next to this baby slide is the toddler slide. Now, the toddler slide, it kind of has these turns to it. And for our little ones, that was too much. That was a little bit scary, and I thought, okay, right, dad mode. Am I going to be a hard dad, or am I going to be a good, gracious dad in this moment? How do I encourage them to go for that? Like, you'll really enjoy it, are you sure? Still no, still nothing. And so my wife Susie turns to me and goes, I've got a really good idea. Why don't you do the really big one, and then maybe they do the small one? And I looked at her and I was like, yeah, I reckon I could do that. Like, it's been a while since I've been on a big, fast slide, but we've been looking at this slide all week, and it kind of like comes out the top of the building, like really high up. Like, imagine like 4 or 5 stories high. Comes out the building, winds round, and then shoots like people. We've been seeing teenagers all week being shot across this pool into the splash zone. And so I was like, right, the moment's come. At least I'll be child-free. So I start making my way up the stairs. And as I get to the top, I start looking down and going, I didn't know I was scared of heights. This is a bit strange. Make my way all the way to the top. And in front of me, I don't know if the slides have got smaller or I've got bigger, but this slide that I'm going to go on, it's like the tiniest little hole, fast flowing water. And all of a sudden, this kind of fear rises up in me. I'm like, I can do this. Why am I getting scared of a water slide? I used to do this all the time as a kid. And like, well, but I've got more to live for now. I've got kids. I've got something to live for. And I look down. I'm like, maybe they're not there. And they're like, yeah, Daddy, go for it. I'm like, okay, right. The peer pressure is getting to me. I've got to do this now. And so I'm just like, okay, a little prayer. Down I go. As I come out the bottom, face down, surrounded by water, as I come up and I like surface from this pool, I put on a big brave face. I'm convinced at this point I have like internal bleeding. And I look over to my family. I'm like, so good. Your turn next, kids. And we make our way down to the toddler pool. And as we're walking down, Susie turns to me and she goes, was that fun? I was like, I'm never doing that again. That was awful. I'm fine in saying I have a fear of small, fast slides. But in life, I think there are different fears that grip us, right? There are fears that keep us safe, like small, fast slides, never doing it again. Keep me safe, not going to get any bruising. But there are some fears in our life that rule us. And this part of Abraham's story that we're going to look today, he comes across 2 major fears in his life that kind of control him. And we're going to chat a little bit more about that. But I want you to think, some fears, they keep us safe and they're good, right? Fear is good. It's God-given. God gives us fear to keep us safe from things. But some fears can rule us and actually separate us from God. Maybe they can control us, cause us to hide, maybe not trust again. I'm not trusting that person again. Or I won't put myself in that situation again. Make us cold, maybe harden our hearts, and maybe out of self-preservation, we're like, I'm not going to go and do that anymore. Maybe our hearts harden. Some fear can even stop us from taking another step in our faith again, telling us we can't do that. So over the last few weeks, just to recap, we've been looking in Genesis at the story of Abraham. And 2 weeks ago, Lewis spoke on our first sermon, which was about the covenant made between Abraham and God. And so Abraham is made promises. There's this promise that's given to him. He'll be a father of a great nation. He'll have many descendants. God's going to guide him and protect him. and all people will be blessed through his family line, and there will be a promised land. So there's all this promise. And then Larry spoke last week about the cost of Abraham. Right at the end of Abraham's walk with Jesus, we hear this story on Mount Moriah, which is where the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is now. But thousands of years before, Abraham ascends this mountain with his son Isaac, and at this point, he's willing to give it all. He's been promised descendants that will not outnumber the stars, but his only one true son. He takes up Mount Moriah, willing to sacrifice him, but then God steps in. Larry told us about that, the saving grace of God, a foretaste of what was to come in Jesus. Only a few kilometers away on a mountain not far from that very mountain, Jesus would be sacrificed for us all. But in between these two, we have this 15-year gap. And this is what we're going to talk today on. We're going to look at the character of Abraham, how it's formed in fear. And so today I want us to look at, in this 15-year gap, there's lots I could have picked from, but I've picked one passage you'll be glad to know. We're not going to read all 7 chapters. But we see in these chapters between this story, fear and doubt. We get an honest insight into Abraham's fears that rule his life. And maybe you'll see these reflected in your own. It's in this in-between stage that Abraham's character is formed by God. And God leads him to the final moments of his story in Genesis 22. So let's read together. I'm going to speak today on how we move from fear to faithfulness. And our passage today is from Genesis 20. So if you have a Bible with you, then feel free to open it. Maybe it's on your phone. If you've got a physical one, that's great, because I might refer to the passages around a little bit. But yeah, if you could grab it, Genesis 20. We're going to read the whole thing. We're going to go for it. So buckle in. So reading from verse 1. Here we go. So Abraham, he's been in Egypt, and he's currently making his way to the promised land. That's the context of this story. And the covenant has been given to him, but he comes into some trouble. So let's read from verse 1. Now Abraham moved from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die." Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Abraham replied, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife." You could marry your sister in the law in those days. We'll move on fairly quickly. And when God made me wander from my father's household, I said to her, "This is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, 'He is my brother.'" Then Abimelech bought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham. And he returned Sarah, his wife to him. And Abimelech said, "My land is before you. Live wherever you like." To Sarah he said, "I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated." Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves, so they could have children again. For the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. We made it through. Well done, guys. That story, it really highlights a couple fears. And I want to drag these out today. And maybe you can relate to some of these fears. There's lots going on. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into all of it. But there's a few things I want to pull out. And I could have picked a number of passages from that kind of time period in Abraham's life, but this one, it strikes a chord on the two key fears that run a trace through Abraham's life. And the first one is this, is the fear of man. So still childless with Sarah many years after the covenant, they still haven't had the seed that was promised that would, populate their family line beyond the numbers of the stars. It still hadn't happened. They come into this foreign land to a powerful king, Abimelech. He's a commander of great armies, we're told. Wealth and riches are in his hands, and Abraham has none of this. And he's the one who was promised to. And so we see Abraham start to take control himself of his actions. And he does it in this first way. Abraham lies about his wife's identity, right? To save himself. Slightly selfish, I think. This is not the first time, though, that Abraham makes this lie. In Genesis 12, if you've read through, it's actually a repeat. When Abraham is in the land of Egypt under Pharaoh, he says the same lie. It's like, she's my sister. And if you follow his family line, this kind of deception thing, it continues. Isaac does exactly the same thing to the exact same king, Abimelech, in the passages that follow. He lies to him and says his wife Rebekah is his sister. And Abimelech at that point's had enough. But even then, Isaac's descendant Jacob, he's named the deceiver, the usurper. There's this family kind of repeat. And I don't know if you find this, but the things in my life that I fear, they come back up again every now and then. That anxiety that I thought I got over, it comes back again. Some of our fears, they have like habitual patterns to them. They're ingrained. And what does Abraham do? He hides. And we read in verse 10 to 11, and Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason? This is the nutshell here. I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. The irony is, Abraham has more fear of the king stood before him than the God he trusts in. He has more fear of the man in front of him than he does of the God who will save him. What does fear of man look like for you? As followers of Jesus, I feel like the fear of man, it most often comes to the surface when we know our faith will make a scene or make people feel uncomfortable in certain situations. And we'd rather keep the peace. I'm not going to say anything. I want to keep the peace. Or maybe put it another way. What other people may say about us or think about us matters more to us than the God who speaks truth over us. What does the fear of man and how does it present itself in your life? My first ever job, I was working in this warehouse. And this warehouse had a load of workers, and my job was basically sorting and packing orders. So you go down these endless rows of shelves to find these orders, and you get your order list and go and find everything. But this warehouse in particular, it was, at the time, it was a leading UK supplier of Christian resources. And I'm pretty sure I was the only Christian in the warehouse. And so every now and then, we'd bring all our stuff to the sorting table. And there'd be these Bibles or books or CDs, and the comments would start to fly. It'd be like, who actually listens to this stuff? Does anyone read this rubbish? Who could actually believe this stuff? I remember one time it just got to me enough. I was just like, you know what? I do. Silence. From that moment onwards, every time one of these resources was brought onto the sorting table where we were packing up these orders, there'd be little comments. Josh, you want one of these CDs to take home? Or Josh, you'd love this book. Look at it. It's all about grief and God and all of this. Or whatever. You know what guys are like. The little jabs. And I was like, okay. But after a while, I started to notice something started to change. And I went into the staff room, and our staff breaks were like ordered. So there'd only be a few people on break, and they'd come out, and then you could go and have break. And so as I'm coming in, there's this one guy in particular he was the one that would jab me the most. And as I come in, we're swapping break shifts, and I go into the break room, and he kind of leaves with the guys he's been with, and the door kind of creaks back open. I turn around, and he's looking at me. He's like, Josh, mate. I'm like, yeah? He's like, would you have a word with the big guy upstairs for me? And I kind of was like stunned silence at this point. He goes, my mum, she's had this test result come back, and we're all really nervous. And if he can do anything, and like I'm sure you're on good terms with him, you shoot up a prayer for me. And I was like, yeah, sure. Door slams, walks off. And so from that moment, a week or so went by, And then same thing happens, but this time we're down the sorting aisles, and I'm packing an order into my basket to go and pack it elsewhere on the sorting table. And he kind of brushes past, like, oh, Josh, that thing. I was like, yeah? He's like, you prayed for my mum. I was like, yeah, I did. And he was like, well, she had the test results back, and they're all clear. And I was like, yeah, I don't, the thing is, I don't know whether that was God or whether, this is the thing about faith. We don't know. We may as well, throw the stone into the lake and see what happens. We can throw our prayers out. I don't know if it was me or whether it was just the good news he'd wanted, but there was something that sparked in him. He saw hope in me when he felt hopeless. He saw a light in me when he felt in darkness. We all have that. The fear of man is the thing that holds us back from shining that light in those places. Be bold. People will be moved. You might get a few jabs. People will always be moved by the hope we have. And that hope is nonsense to people that don't believe in it. But when times come, sometimes that nonsense can make a whole lot of sense. So the fear of man. The next fear we see Abraham face is this: the fear of failure. Now, up to this point, there's been a couple moments where Abraham's felt like this promise isn't all it's cracked out to be. For example, just before this passage, there's a harrowing story, of a servant called Hagar who serves Sarah. And they're trying to shortcut at this point. Like, this isn't going to happen. We can't have children. At this point, Abraham is like 100 and Sarah is 90. So they're really old. We can't have children. And so they suggest that Abraham has a child with this servant, Hagar, and Ishmael is born. And so they've tried to shortcut God's promise. They're like, you know what? I'm in this trench. I'll get myself out of it. And so, but that doesn't really work out. There's a lot of family drama. And so we land in this passage where Abraham walks into a land that he doesn't know. And so he does the same thing. He fears failure. And so we read in verse 13, and when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you will show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. Abraham has a get-out plan. He's like, you know what, if this doesn't work out, I'll say this, and the king will have favor, and then we'll all be good. Hopefully nothing happens. Abraham tries to plan on God's behalf. He tries to cut corners, and we see that in this passage. But do you see how it plays out? God doesn't give up on Abraham. He fights for him. He appears to Abimelech in a dream. We serve a God who is greater than our failures. We serve a God who is always working things for our good. And he's working things for good here for Abraham. He speaks to Abimelech powerfully. How often I have tried in my own strength to make things happen, in my own power and might, not trusting in God's life. But still, he never leaves me. When writing this talk, I asked my wife, Susie, I was like, can you think of a time that, this is what we do, by the way, when we write sermons, like, can you think of a story of a time where, I lacked, patience, and I kind of, tried to jump to the end, and Susie goes, how long you got to talk? Oh, that's slightly harsh, babe. But it made me think of this story instead. I have a best mate called Sean, and he's a bit of a handyman, so whenever a job needs doing in a house, he won't get anyone in. He'll do it himself. He's very proud in a good way. Proud in a good way. Anyway, he just bought this new house. And it was a really nice terrace house in Watford where we were living at the time. And in his garden, he had this idea. He's like, oh, you know what? I want to build an extension. We need a bigger kitchen maybe and a bathroom at the back of the house. So I'm going to build this extension. So this text comes to the guys' chat on my phone. And it reads along the lines of, hey, boys, fancy bacon butties around my house on Saturday. Would need your help digging in the garden. I was like, yeah, sure. I could go and dig some flower beds in your new house garden. That sounds great. So anyway, we all head over there. And we arrive, and there's these shovels and a digger in the garden. It's like, we're digging a foundation. I'm like, we're doing what? Anyway, after about 6 hours, we've dug this 4 or 5 foot trench around the back of his garden. And his garden, before we started digging, was so lovely. The owner there before had really looked after it, and it was just a mess. Mud everywhere. These trenches, were in no time it was going to rain, they were going to fill with water. And we're stood there with our bacon sandwiches and our coffees. And I turned to him, and I'm like, looks great, doesn't it? Looks really good. And Sean's there with a massive smile on his face. He's like, oh, this is going to be awesome. 2 completely different perspectives. Sean could see what was going to happen, and I couldn't. I had no idea what his vision was. But he dug these foundations, and the bathroom that eventually came was glorious with underfloor heating. But in that moment, in that mud, in that muck, in the mess of life that we sometimes find ourselves in, it's like, what are you doing in this, God? If you've put me here, how are you working for my good in this? And that's the moment that fear comes in. Same with Abraham. It's like, I'm going to make the best of this situation myself. Like, we take the trust away, the obedience away from God. I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to fight my own battle. And we kind of like, in our own strength, get fatigued. Stood in the mess and muck and ditches that we find ourselves in our life, in those foundations, God is still building the house. Do you believe that? God is still building the house. Do you trust him? Finally, the final fear that brings everything around for Abraham is the fear of God. Now, the fear of God is this reverence and trust and obedience in something that is so much higher, so much greater than you, that you give your all for it. And I want to talk a little bit about this reordering we see happen in Abraham's life. This fear of God goes to the top. It doesn't cancel out the fears for Abraham. They still come in a few chapters' times. They still, generations on generations still happen. They're happening today too. But the fear of God goes to the top. That's the reason he can stand on Mount Moriah with his son and go, God, you can have it all. He gets to this point where he trusts completely. In the chapter that follows, Abraham goes on to settle in Abimelech's land, and he spends many years there. And finally, his son Isaac is born. And after many years of watching and admiring Abraham, Abimelech comes to him, and we read this in chapter 21. At that time, Abimelech and Philcol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham's story, it doesn't end with him finally getting it all right, but it ends with him finally trusting the character of God. And even Abimelech, with all the worldly power he has, sees the power of God at work in Abraham's life. God is in everything you do. The heavenly blessings are pouring out on Abraham, and he's pursuing God instead of his fear. And when Abraham stands on Mount Moriah, that mountain, with his son, the fear of man no longer controls him. The fear of failure no longer drives him. But the fear of God, deep reverence and trust, now rules his life. And that kind of fear, it doesn't paralyze us. The fear of God doesn't paralyze us. It produces obedience, surrender, faithfulness. Abraham trusted that even if he let go of the promise, God would still be faithful to keep it. And on the mountain, God provides a ram caught in thorns, that picture of Jesus. There will be another son. And this time, it's not spared, but given freely. So that fear would no longer have the final word on our lives. And that's why Paul says this strange thing in Romans to the church in Romans who are being persecuted for their faith. They're in the trenches of life. He says, we glory in our suffering. What a weird thing to say. We glory in our suffering. Not because suffering is good, but because God is forming something in us through it. He says this in Romans 5. Suffering leads to perseverance. Perseverance leads to character. Character leads to hope. People see the hope in you when you put your trust in God. Fear doesn't get the final word. Suffering, failure, they don't get the final word either. God does. And that same spirit that is at work in Abraham is now at work in your life too. I want to read this final passage. This is Paul again to one of his young apprentices, Timothy. In 2 Timothy 1, 6-7, he says this. For this reason, I remind you, Timothy, to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid or fearful, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline.